Good day, I'm Dr. T and welcome to my office. And today I'd like to talk about how the foreseeable future of AI is not the same as the history of the calculator, at least in my opinion. First caveat, we are talking about things that are coming down the road, things that are rapidly developing, and therefore we don't actually know where they're going to go. The folks over at OpenAI basically have said ChatGPT 4, so the next generation, don't hold your breath for it being that much more impressive. That said, other reports have said quite the opposite. They're looking for something that's going to be a lot more impressive. So we don't know how good AI is going to get in 6 months or in 60 years. But things are going to be changing. Now, thinking about AI in terms of what we have currently or kind of the immediate future, not the paradigm shifting AI does all the work for us and yeah, we all just either live off of universal income or starve to death, depending on how politics goes. So ignoring the humans need not apply future. By the way, if you've not seen that video, link in the description. Really good, really scary. So let's assume AI kind of keeps consistent with what it's doing, gets better at what it's doing, but isn't to the point where it can just start replacing people wholesale. That means we still need to educate people because we're going to still need a workforce because AI hasn't replaced it. And we're going to have a couple of issues that we're going to need to look at. Now, to look at the issues, or the kind of the core issues I see coming up with integrating AI into education, I want to take a playbook out of video game design. It's a concept called a difficulty curve. You might see it called a skill curve or a learning curve, and you will definitely see this in pedagogy, but typically you gotta go looking for these. It's not one of the hot topic issues that you kind of see all the time in all of the here's how to teach better books. So basically, let's think about kind of an example, and I'll pull it off over here. So imagine a graph. You have got an x-axis. The x-axis is going to be the progression through, say, the video game, or through life, or the course, or the curriculum, multiple courses together. However you want to think of it. Let's think about video games, though. So you've got the progression through the video game. That's your x-axis. Your y-axis is going to be how much skill it takes to successfully do the game. So how hard is it? Now, if you've got new players that have not played your video game before, because everyone has to start somewhere. KXCD has a great comic on that one, by the way. Probably link in the description as well. And maybe a future video, because that's a good comic. Anyways, so someone's starting somewhere. They're not going to start out with a ton of skills. Now, that player may have played games like this particular game, and therefore are coming out with actually a pretty decent amount of skills there. Or maybe this is the first video game they've ever played in their life. Hopefully this is not Dark Souls. It's not going to end well. Okay, so that player is going to need a certain amount of skills. Now, they're not going to be like masters at the video game. They've never played it before. So you don't want it to be too hard. If it's too hard, they're going to get frustrated and quit. Additionally, if it's too hard, if you're trying to do something you can't handle, you're actually not going to learn all that well doing it. So if you're barely surviving, yeah, that's not the best learning environment. You're just too focused on not failing at that point. Now, likewise, though, you don't want it too easy, because if it's too easy, it's going to be boring. And also, there's no reason for the person to develop their skills. So if you can just bash A, and you can just hit A over and over and over again, well, that's the skill you're going to learn, how to bash the A button repeatedly, harder and faster. Is that the skill that your game is going to need for the future? I hope not. Although, back in the day, there were definitely some button mashing games that were pretty fun. But presumably, you want it to be a little bit more difficult, and so that they grow their skills. So now, as the game progresses, the player's skills are hopefully progressing too, so you want to make it more difficult. So they're still finding it engaging, and they're still being pushed to learn. You want to push them. You don't want to push them too much. Otherwise, they're going to quit. They're going to give you a negative review, and they're not going to buy your DLC or microtransactions and whatnot. Likewise, they're not going to learn more stuff. Now, as the game progresses, you're just going to get harder and harder and harder, but hopefully your players' skills are going to get better and better and better, and so that if they were to, say, start the game over again, where they now have skills that they're bringing over. They're like, man, this is easy. I thought this was hard, but this is easy. And for those of us who are gamers, we've all had this experience. Like, oh wow, yeah, I remember the first time I played this, I thought this was like hard. This is not hard. This is so easy. But that's because we've got the skills. Okay, now, one of the things that game developers need to watch out for is a lumpy line. Some lumps are fine. You don't want total intense action all the time. You want, some narrative pacing, the hard parts and then the easy parts and kind of space things up a bit. But what you don't want to do is be easy, 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 hard, to the point where the person's skills haven't developed enough, and all of a sudden you jolt them with a massive skill requirement that they don't have preparation for. So now all of a sudden your game went from kind of boring to just give up and quit. And I've had games like this. I've played Dark Souls. I didn't play very long. I didn't have enough skills going into that one to get past the first enemy. Not the first boss, the first enemy. Because, that was my first experience into that kind of gaming. I'm not really that style gamer. If you've looked at my other channel, very different set of games. And of course I hit a difficulty level. It's like, I'm just dead. I'm dead. I'm dead. I'm dead. I'm dead. I quit. Well, if we're not talking about video games here, if we're talking about, say, teaching students, I quit has a lot bigger ramification than having just bought a AAA game and wasted the money. So we don't want to have that jump anywhere in our course. Little humps are fine. Sometimes they're unavoidable. I teach general chemistry quite often. Dimensional analysis is always a nice hump. It's kind of a weird thing to do. Something students haven't encountered before, but once they get it, hey, the rest of stoichiometry is really not that bad once you get dimensional analysis down. So there are going to be lumps and bumps, and that's okay, but you want to make sure there are small lumps and bumps. Otherwise, they can create a catastrophic problem because the student comes in and all of a sudden the difficulty just skyrockets and their skill is not what it needs to be to continue on. And once you overload the student, once all of a sudden it's hitting a problem beyond that which they can even begin to tackle, they're not going to learn anything. If you're lifting weights, if you're benching, 50 pounds, and now all of a sudden someone gives you a 1,000 pound barbell, you're not going to get any strength from it. You're just going to go, and nothing's going to happen. You're not going to build muscle. You're just going to realize that you should quit. Okay, with the context of learning curves and skill development, here is where the AI creates a situation where it's not the same as a calculator. With math, when you're performing a calculation, you need to know basically two things. What numbers need to have what operations performed on them, and then you need to be able to do those operations. So you need to know that, say, 27 needs to be times by 6. You also now need to know how to get a number from 27 times by 6. Well, a calculator can do that latter part perfectly well, and there's really no operation that a calculator, maybe you need a fancy, more advanced calculator, but there's no operation where you can do that in your head or on paper better than the calculator is going to be able to do. There might be some weird niche application, but I don't think so. So you don't need to learn those operations at all. There's no reason for you to develop those skills. Those have now become more or less obsolete. Okay, AI currently doesn't have that ability yet. AI is currently capable of doing a lot of research, a lot of thinking, a lot of processing of information, and then a lot of communicating those ideas. But it doesn't always do a great job. And it does fine for kind of surface level analysis for moderate and low level stuff, but once you get more advanced, AI is currently not doing a great job of it. Once AI is able to handle the advanced level and do a really good job, we've got another problem, and that is, why do we humans need to exist? The AI can just do it for us. See earlier comment about humans need not apply. Hopefully that future is not right upon us. And if that's the case, then we actually have an interesting problem in education, because we've got a dip in our skill curve if the student is using AI. So as you're learning to write, to communicate, to do critical thinking, all absolutely essential skills in the 21st century. Well, you have to start off small. You don't start writing large theses. You start out by writing sentences. So little kid starts learning how to write words. They start learning how to make sentences, not necessarily in that order. And then as you become more mature, you gain more and more abilities to do critical thinking, to look up information, to process information into new ideas, and then to communicate that. Well, obviously, as you're doing so, you're starting from basically zero, and you're going to go through that intermediate and moderate phase that AI is currently able of doing just fine. Well, if you let the AI do it for you, now all of a sudden, there's not a skill issue. So now the student has a way of achieving their goals without using the necessary skills and without growing those skills. So now they're progressing, but instead of going up a skill slope, that slope has now flattened. But here's the rub. As you progress far enough, AI hasn't flattened the whole slope. So now all of a sudden, you still have to be at a fairly advanced skill level at a certain point. So instead of a nice, gentle slope up, it's a very abrupt jump. The exact thing that's going to cause people to quit because they cannot meet those skill jumps. This person would have to go back, relearn everything they didn't learn, and then get to the point where they're able to then start processing that information. This is an area where game designers have to be careful. I believe there was one of the first-person shooters, I can't remember which one, had a particular weapon in the game that was very easy to just kind of ride on the coattails. It was kind of looked down upon because it was a little too easy to use. But it was also one of those like you could progress so far, but if you didn't switch and use the other tools the game provided you, you didn't learn how to use them, and eventually you'd hit a wall where you didn't know how to use it, and you'd put down the game. Okay, so the issue we are currently having is that if a student decides to use AI to complete a lot of the assignments that we've been doing, especially those that are of formative nature, then they're not going to be gaining the benefit and they're not going to be building their skills until a certain point where the AI is not going to cut it and they don't have the skills to progress further, and now this is bad. A couple of the calls are like, well, we can solve this by using authentic assessments. Use something that they can't use the AI for, that's exactly what they'll be using in the future, or very closely modeled to what they might be using in the future for whatever they're going and doing. To this, I have the comment of the donut. This comes from one of my colleagues. I cannot remember which one, so I would like to credit them, but I do not remember who they were so that I could credit them. And the idea of the donut is that basic skills are quite often very, very useful. The number of real-world examples of things you can do in, say, grade school are quite high. It's like, we're going to find, fractions. Where will we find fractions? We find fractions all over the place. Let's calculate unit prices, etc., to figure out, which bottle of soda is cheaper, the big bottle or the little bottles, that kinds of stuff. Lots of examples, lots of real-world applications. And yeah, if you can use those, more power to you. They're a great way of teaching. Also, there are distinct real-world applications for understanding fairly advanced calculus. Hey, let's figure out where this cannonball is going to land. Now, of course, we're going to need to calculate air resistance, etc. This is a lot of math. This is going to take some pretty hardcore equations. Problem's in the middle. Physics kind of gets around this with its hypothetical spherical cows. Like, let's pretend a cow is a sphere and it's in a vacuum. But is that really a real-world example? How many spherical cows are you chucking around in a vacuum? Not many, I would assume. So now all of a sudden, this middle area, most of the skills the student have isn't going to actually be able to apply to any particular real-world application. They either need a lot more skills, or they don't actually need as much as they currently have. They're in this middle area, this middle of the donut, where they don't know enough to do anything interesting. So, Where do we go with this one? We have contrived assignments, very artificial ideas like spherical cows in space. And yeah, these are not authentic, but they can't be. Now, there are cases where you can be authentic. And if you can, more power to you. But this is not a universal fix. This is not something like, oh, you can just have authentic assignments. Not in all applications. In a lot of applications, you just can't. There aren't any. They're so contrived to make them possible for the student that they're no longer authentic in the least bit. There are no easy answers. You can say don't use AI, and right now I think that's our only best choice. However, you can have a rule, and that's great, but enforcing a rule is a completely different story. We've got AI detection software. It's not perfect. And also, it's not exactly proof. It's more of an indication. Yeah, okay. We can try and change our assignments. And to that will help in some cases. We'll have a more contrived assignment, something a bit different. Maybe have them do pen and paper in class. In some cases that will help. Doing things that the AI can't do on their own, but at a certain point, you need to be able to research stuff, figure out information, and communicate that, and you're probably not going to be able to do that in an hour and a half. So, yeah, I don't know where we go with the AI area. Hopefully, things will become more clear in the future. We'll have some better ideas, but right now I know that anyone tells you that there is a simple, obvious, clear solution doesn't know what they're talking about. And I'll see you later. Best of luck.